back. So I want to sort of start out by thanking Connie Richardson, who is here with us from the Dana Center. Dana Center has been our partner in this work for years now, working on going back to Corequisite, and has been an essential part of our work in building out both statistics pathway learning support and also just general learning support. And so thanks for being here with us again, Connie. And she brings with us Dr. Tammy Randolph. Dr. Randolph started out in math. She'll actually tell us she started out in teaching high school, where she then taught math and then became a dean and is now probably considering becoming a high school teacher yet again. But this conversation we're having today comes around from both what Dr. Denley was talking about the ways in which supporting students in these mixed models seems to have a lot of, there's a necessity around coordination. We've had these conversations. This came up when I solicited feedback for both the spring Corequisite Academy and the fall. There were conversations about it's very hard to coordinate sections when the faculty are not the same. And we understand, frankly, that coordinating faculty, like having the same faculty teach both, is both a staffing concern and it's an obstacle. It's just it's a logistical headache. You have students who can't make those courses. They have to have separate schedules. And so if you're able to lock it down and have it, you'll always have a few outliers. And so one of the items that came up and has come up through some of our work, actually through learning support around statistics pathway, and has emerged before, and we're happy to have Dr. Randolph come and sort of talk about the nuts and bolts of doing this, is this idea of common calendars, sharing calendars. Now, again, this is a math conversation. I will highlight the fact that if you wandered into this room and you're an English major, you're not alone. I was also in English, but it has application across fields. So with that, I kind of want to give Dr. Randolph the floor. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you want to start sharing yours. And Connie, I know there are some resources that were developed for this, and I think, are you going to put those, the link to that will go into the chat?
Exactly, and I'll drop again as well for joining us.
Sure, and we will also be distributing this out, so you'll have that access too. But anyway, so with that, rather characteristic of me, but probably not sufficient introduction, I'll hand it back over to Dr. Randolph. Thanks for joining us again from Missouri.
Thank you, Jonathan. I have tried to share my screen. Can everyone see the first slide that says calendar backmapping workshop? Is that up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. It's silent out there, so you guys scared me for a minute. Call me Tammy, please. Hopefully we can be friends as this progresses and share some things. You guys have done some work. Obviously, I'm interested in, so hopefully we can do some sharing as this progresses. But let me find. Okay. Quickly, some objectives that we have for this session today. So exploring strategies, looking at learning support, discussing design and alignment process, and then planning some next steps. This is all through this calendaring process. And I'll talk a little bit about my background and where I come from. But as Jonathan said, I've done a lot of mathematics on a lot of different levels, but I've also been in administration here and there and everywhere else on this campus anyway. So I come to you from Southeast Missouri State. We call ourselves moderately selective. I have that in quotes because really we're open in mission now because of lots of things, including COVID, but we have a state designation of moderately selective, which means we have a certain ACT and certain high school requirements before you can enter. We have approximately 10,000 students currently, and I put 47% here for first-time, full-time freshmen. Those numbers go up and down. 47 seemed like a good prime number for me to look at right now. I think right now they're probably closer to 50% or 49%, but we have a lot of first generation for a regional comprehensive, and we have a lot of students who require academic support. So obviously not the same group there in both of those pieces, but interestingly enough, about the same percentage. So I will talk about some things when we talk about calendaring and organizing. So, when I talk about the two kinds of faculty we have regular non-tenure track faculty, which some institutions call instructors, and then we have tenure track faculty. So as I make those designations later, just know that that's what I'm talking about. Also, so you can see how we've organized this. This was when I left the math department in 2018. This was a flow chart that I made at that time. It has not changed, but I didn't go back and ask for an updated one that had a different date on it. So this is what our program of study looks like. We do still have a basic math course because we have turned into basically an open admission institution. There is that requirement out there for people who either have a very low ACT or just want a refresher. I mean, we allow people to come back. So we have a lot of non-traditional people who come to school or who have been coming to school recently. They might stay at the beginning level for a semester so they can get back to where they need to be and then take one of the courses they need. So just so you see what's going on, the next layer down, we have 4 pathways, and we have had 4 pathways the entire time I've been here. So 25 years this institution has had math pathways. We haven't done anything in terms of advising tracks or co-requisites until recently being, and I'll show you that, 2014 is where we started some of that, but this is what it looks like. And back in 2014, when we started this process, I will say that algebra, pre-calculus, calculus track that you see with all the courses in it, that track probably contains 65% of our majors, because again, college algebra was the safe path at that time. Mathematical modeling, reasoning, the number and operation for educators, and the statistical reasoning probably equally divided the other into thirds. So 10%-ish for each of those, I would say, when I first started. I did get data from the department. So currently only 35% are in that pathway that's calculus, algebra, 14% in that math pathway, 19% in the reasoning pathway, and then 32% in the statistics pathway, that third one. So a little different spread than we had before. So statistics has kind of taken off and the algebra pathway's kind of gone down. So that is what we've seen here. That's happened for a couple of reasons, and I can talk about those later, but big reasons are we have a huge nursing program and they've moved to statistics course, and our business college has decided to move to a statistics course. So some of those changes have been implemented recently, and that's why you see it. But here's a timeline just to give you a sense of where we came from and where we were. And again, like I said, I left in 18, so I kind of left this timeline up here just to give you a sense of what was going on. In the spring of 2014, the president mandated that we change the way we do developmental math. His mandate was we started using more technology. We increased class size. He wanted classes of 100 in our developmental math program. And he also wanted success rates to increase. So at that time, you guys can imagine, and I'll show you data that says that our success rates were not very good. Our class sizes were about 30. And then the president came in and said, we're going to use more technology, more students in a room, and he wants that success rate number to increase. So success to him was A, B, or C. And I know that varies when you talk about success at different institutions. So that's where we were then. In 2014, right after that, the summer, we had course coordinators, and I'll go into that deeper because we're going to talk about that common syllabus and common calendar and a learning management system shell that we had. And then you see the implementation as it went. And again, there hasn't been any changes in the implementation since then. We really have just been going back and doing plan, do, check, act, check, act, check, act, check, act. So we check what we're doing, we look at assessment, we act on that, and then we cycle through again. So we haven't done any huge redesign since fall of 2017. If anybody has questions too, please feel free to stop me. I'm trying to get through these slides as quick as possible so you can have some background, but also understand where I'm coming from. And then let's talk about some of the things that you guys are here to talk about. So if something comes up, please, Jonathan, I hope you're checking the chat for me, but I want to make sure I get those questions answered too. So as the department chairperson, I thought my responsibilities were this. When the president said you need to do this, I selected the people who were going to be integral in this work. I also went across campus and talked to constituents. So not only were the math faculty crucially important, but we have support people across campus, and each of you call these different things. But we have a registrar's office that takes care of registration and records. Information technology was going to be key if we had to integrate more technology into the classroom. And facilities management became integral because I actually had to build a new classroom with all this technology in it. Now the president wanted 100 seats. I ended up at 60. And we can talk about how that worked out, but we still have a classroom with 60 computer stations in it, and we're using that in the math department currently. But also constituents was people across campus and administration, faculty outside the department. Obviously, advisors were critical in this redesign, and students. We had to sell students on a redesign. They didn't like the coursework that we had. We had 3 levels of developmental math before we started this. but that was all that they knew. So it was very difficult to convince them, along with everybody else, that we needed to change. So we did an advertising blitz with them and everyone else. So when I talk about constituents, there were lots of people that we worked with, and I tried to reach out to most of them. Now, there was some work with the redesign team members that reached out to other departments who were cognate in some of the coursework that we used, and we'll talk about that later. But it was a huge sell campaign just to make sure everybody was on the same page, and we did it so quickly that we wanted to make sure that everybody understood how important this was going to be and the success of it, how crucial it was going to be. So that gives you kind of a context of where I thought my work was. Here was for the redesign team, and I'll slow down when I talk about this a little bit, but I knew the president said in the spring this had to happen. I had the summer to get the design, the people, everything in place, and then we implemented it that fall. So we didn't even have a year to get this implementation done from when the president told us we were going to do it. So it was pretty fast and furious. But I asked the math faculty to apply. And again, those two different kinds of faculty we have. We have the regular non-tenure track instructors and the tenure track. To me, it was critical to make sure that one of each of those types of faculty members were on this redesign team, this course coordination team, because they were going to be the spokespeople for this coordination we were doing between the Gateway college level course and the Corequisite developmental support course. So I needed people who could sell these. So I wanted them to apply for this position because they knew how important it was going to be, and they bought into these courses. So that summer, after we chose those individuals, we all came together. We sat in a computer lab the entire summer. Being a math educator, I put big Post-it notes on the wall, and we had education things that we talked about learning styles and implementation and different ways we wanted to assess. But it really was down to the meat most of the time. But all of those groups met in that same room. So of those 4 pathways, I had 8 individuals in that room with me all summer long, and we met at least 3 times a week together with all of us in that room. So 8 of them, 1 of me, I fed them, I kept them hydrated, I kept them snacked. They were good to go. All they had to do was work together to come up with some stuff. And they enjoyed that time together. If we just put them in teams of the statistics people in a room together, the math education people in a room together, et cetera, they often ended up back together, because they wanted to know how someone else was dealing with that support course. They wanted to know how they were doing the assessments. They wanted to know how they were doing the time in class. They wanted to know how they set up the curriculum. I mean, it was very important to have all of these groups of people together at the same time in the same place, at least to start this process. And like I said, we did it so quickly that it really just kind of rolled together. Interestingly enough, though, as we started this process, we backwards mapped. So we looked at those courses that we already had in the pathways, and then we added the support material to that. Well, in the process of adding that support material, that just-in-time material, they all decided that those gateway courses, those collegiate level courses we already had, they needed to be more rigorous. And they either decided that on their own, or they decided that when they reached out to those cognate departments that I talked about earlier. So if you were doing a survey of math course, the quantitative literacy or quantitative reasoning course, our fine arts people typically took that course. So the 2 individuals that were working on that course, that co-requisite piece, would reach out to the individuals in that college and say, hey, here's the current objectives for this course. Are there other things we need to add to that course? So in the process of those conversations, those courses actually became more rigorous, which we didn't think about when we set out to do this. So that was kind of an added advantage, I guess, for us, because obviously as mathematicians, we like to add a little rigor to what we're doing. So in the process, though, these 8 individuals for those 4 pathways created 2 sets each. So they created materials for the Gateway course. They also created materials for that support co-requisite course that accompanied it. So all of that developmental math material that we had covered before in those courses that we called intermediate algebra, beginning algebra, some kind of algebra, that material was put in there, and only the material that was relevant to that Gateway or collegiate course was put into that co-requisite support course. We didn't just automatically drop everything in there and say, oh, it all has to be here. We intentionally put places where we wanted it to be as we backwards map from those Gateway co-requisite courses. So we looked backwards and said, this is important, we need to include this. And then we pushed it back a couple weeks so they had time to work with it, identify it, absorb it, understand it, and then they came to it in the Gateway course. So that was what was important for this group of 8 people. That's how they all worked together. Common calendars were created, which is primarily one of the conversations we're going to have today. And there are some calendars out in the box that I showed you the address for earlier. Those are all of the current calendars that I was able to obtain from the current department chair in the math department. So if you want to go out and see what a course calendar looks like, those are out there. Also, I have one that's much more detailed for those of you that have ever been a high school math teacher or middle school teacher, elementary teacher. Those teachers editions had tons and tons of verbiage in them. We created one that was very, very verbose for the education pathway. So it had a lot more context in it than some of the other ones did. But those calendars became important because as these individuals created those co-requisite pieces and they put the gateway and aligned it with the co-requisite support course, we wanted to make sure that everybody was in the same place at the same time because we co-mingled. I didn't tell you that earlier, but everything we had was co-mingled. So students could enroll in whichever support course they wanted and whichever gateway course they wanted. If they wanted the same instructor, they could have the same instructor. If they wanted two different instructors, they could have two different instructors. And when I interviewed students, I found that it went both ways. I found some students wanted the same person twice, and I found other students wanted two different opinions, wanted to listen two different ways to have the material presented to them. Even though one was a gateway and one was a support, some students thought that was important to hear that different information. So we weren't cohorted at all. So it was very, very critical at that time because we were commingled, because everybody was mixed together, that we made sure everybody was on path, which is why that common calendar was created. So on this day of the week, everybody plus or minus was in that same place. So if you had a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class or a Tuesday, Thursday class, you had a schedule that you followed. You had a calendar that you followed. And that summer, those individuals created that material. You also had a common syllabus template, which is what some of those things are out in the box. You'll see it says insert name here, insert office hours here, and then it has all of the objectives for the course as well as a schedule for the course and some of the other common things that we have here about what are they, academic responsibilities of students and cheating and attending class and things like that. So you'll find those out in the box. Feel free to use, steal, take, borrow, beg, whatever you need. If you need anything else, feel free to contact me. I'm sure I can put you in contact with somebody who's in the department right now. If you want to know what they're doing in a certain place or you see something, you say, hey, that's interesting. I wonder what that looks like. So we changed LMSs in the process of this. So our learning management system did change. We're a Moodle campus now, and next semester we're changing to Canvas. So every time we change, obviously that changes how those templates are set up. But again, those individuals create those templates, and if you're teaching one of these courses, it rolls out to you and your template is set up for you. So all your homework is already chosen in the homework set, your template for the course is already set up, your weeks are already set up. So everything is set up for you. It makes it very, very convenient and nice because that conversation, that baseline of, oh my gosh, I gotta get all this ready. I only have 2 weeks before school starts. I gotta create a syllabus. I've gotta think about all this. All that was already set up for these individuals when they came in the fall. The one thing that wasn't set up were assessments. So after the people came back for the fall and you were gonna teach one of these courses, one of these pathways, you had meetings before school ever started with these two coordinators and talked about how the assessments were going to be created. Typically, you looked at the schedule and you said, hey, I kind of like this content. I'm going to write that assessment. Or can you and I write this one because this is a test and I'd rather have some help writing this. So the assessments were not created before. The assessments were created during the semester by the individuals actually teaching those courses. So we had a common syllabus, a common calendar. The learning management system template was out there and the homework was already set up in the homework manager. We used to use Pearson, now we're using Lumen. But the assessments were not set up previously. The assessments were divvied up among the people teaching the course during that semester. So as the semester went, there were also meetings with people. So if you were in the quantitative reasoning, quantitative literacy, survey of math course, we all call it something a little bit different, then you would meet with your two course coordinators at least once a week through that fall semester when we first started, just to make sure everybody was in the same place. Did the calendar need to be adjusted? Are we covering the topics the way we want to? Does someone have an idea? Because I know this is going to be a tough topic. I need help covering this. What are my students going to say? How are we going to do this? Oh, you've got a worksheet here. Thank you. So it very much was that collaboration time that we had been missing here at the collegiate level. Now, when I taught high school, some places I had that, some places I didn't. But if I taught one section of Algebra 1, somebody else taught a section of Algebra 1, we were often kind of trading off. Here at the university, I didn't find that. We don't have time. We're not all here at the same time. So it was very difficult for that collaboration. But that first time when we did this, we all collaborated together in the teams in which we taught these courses. So it was a very nice setup. So the course coordinators got together that summer, set up those templates. Obviously, everything wasn't set in stone. Some things changed very quickly in the semester. We realized we could or couldn't get through the material like we thought we could. So things were adjusted as we went through, but everybody had meetings weekly to have those conversations. So if things needed to be adjusted, everybody that taught those courses, whether it was the gateway course or whether it was a support course, they were all in the room at the same time. I will say, if you taught the support course, I also asked that you teach a section of the gateway course because I thought it was important that you saw both. Now, it wasn't true that it went the other way. If you taught a gateway course, you didn't necessarily teach a support course. We had probably half of the individuals that needed support, as I showed you earlier. The other half didn't. So we obviously didn't have a one-to-one relationship with the number of support courses as the number of gateway courses. But we did make sure that if you taught a support course, you also taught that gateway course so you could understand that alignment. Now, you didn't necessarily have the same students, but you did have students who were at both levels. So when you taught that gateway course, you had students in that gateway course who did have a support course, and you had students in that gateway course that did not have a support course. And there was no magic number. We didn't hold seats and say half of them had to have support, half of them didn't, none of them in this. I mean, it was totally open enrollment. We had issues. I said earlier, we worked at the registrar. We had some issues about how scheduling would happen. So I just decided, in order to make it easy on everybody, we wouldn't try to control seats in any of these courses. So sometimes that causes problems for people. I know people want to make controls, want to make sure that you've got an even number of support or not support, or make the section everybody who's also in a support course. But for us, it just was not going to work for lots of reasons. So we just mixed it up and let it happen. And thank goodness the commingling worked in all ways for us. So we were extremely lucky when we started out doing this several years ago. So I'm going to stop here. I think I've rattled on. Before I start another section, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have comments before we go on to something else?
Tammy, when you were talking about the computer lab, a question popped up about whether the classes were lecture or modular on technology. I know you're going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide, but if role that the computer lab played.
Okay.
And then secondly, you mentioned the regular meetings y'all had that first year, and I wonder if you have an estimate, you know, after a year or so, how often people were getting together and having conversations.
Because we don't have a lot of turnover with faculty, I don't think those faculty probably get together more than once every quarter so they get together twice a semester, I would say now. It's pretty fine-tuned. We've been at this for a while, but that first year or two, they got together at least every other week still. I mean, they really wanted to make sure this worked. They really, really bought into the courses that they taught, because now they got to teach what they wanted to teach. They didn't teach the same student semester after semester after semester in some algebra course that the student really didn't need. So we did a good job putting those students in pathways, and the faculty enjoyed what they were doing much better. And since it was common, the syllabus and the material and the homework, they seemed to really, really like what they were doing. So sometimes I would walk into one of those meetings and they'd all be sitting there grading together. I felt like I was in the teacher's lounge in a high school anymore, but they don't get together now. Like I said, we've had one new faculty member in the last 8 years. So most of them that have been doing this are probably the same people that were doing it before. But good question, Connie. I mean, it is relevant depending on if you have turnover with faculty or adjuncts. When I was department chairperson, I asked that faculty do an overload as opposed to teaching adjuncts. Most of them were willing to do that. I rarely had to hire an adjunct, and if it was someone who was already teaching one of those courses for us for dual credit. So we really had that constant core of faculty the entire time going through each of those pathways for us. So, and I will talk about the technology here in a minute. Anything else I need to stop and talk about? I feel like I'm rambling on.
So there's a question in the chat about how many students were in co-rec course if you do not control the enrollment, and how did you schedule faculty?
The number of students in the co-rec course were students that either chose to be there or students that would have been there before because of their ACT placement or no ACT placement. So we had a limit to the number of seats in each of those courses, just like they would register for any other course, but we didn't control which students went into which section. So as long as there was a seat in a gateway course, anybody could take that seat. As long as there was a seat in the co-requisite support course, anybody could take that too. I actually had students who didn't place into the developmental, didn't necessarily need support based on ACT, but they chose to go into that support course because they heard great things about what was happening in there. So when I say we didn't limit it, we obviously had a certain number of seats we had to fill, but people could choose wherever they wanted to go. And faculty, I put the schedule out, and faculty, as they normally do, say, I can or can't teach at this time. I can or can't do this. I'd like to do this. I'd like to do a support course and a gateway course back to back. I'd like to teach both of them on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and support on Tuesday, Thursday. I mean, I had a lot of input from faculty about what they wanted. Now, granted, as department chair, anybody who's a department chair out there, anybody who's been in charge of scheduling understands you can't always give everybody what they want. But we scheduled these classes just like we scheduled everything else in the department. I mean, I didn't intentionally go through and put people back to back in courses. I didn't intentionally not put them back to back in courses. I mean, it really had to do with if you had other courses that you had to teach, if you were a tenure track member and you had to teach discrete math and it was always Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 o'clock, well, obviously that limited when you could teach these courses. So, I mean, it really was kind of a whole collaborative of who wants to teach when and where, and how many days a week you want to teach these. So, am I answering the questions?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so so those of you who don't have the chat open, there's a sort of a follow on to that about like the idea that so students, there's absolutely no controls on whether a student is in the same instructor or different instructor. The student has a degree of control over that if they choose to register for it, but it's not a mandate. It's not, but that is sort of addressed in terms of the coordination of this by the fact that it doesn't matter which co-requisite course you're in, because all of the collegiate courses are following a common calendar. So the just-in-time-ness of the support is guaranteed regardless of instructor mix, because they're all following the same calendar. Am I right on that, Tammy?
Yes, absolutely. And Jonathan, while you say that, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later, but those of you that have been in charge of scheduling or any kind of administration, I don't know how many of you have had how many students each semester that come in and go, I don't like this instructor, or my friend's in another section, it's easier than this. My friend's in another section, they are or aren't doing tests or quizzes. I don't like this instructor, I want to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Honestly, no lies, guys. I heard none of that, because every instructor gave the same quiz, gave the same test, gave the same homework. They were all in, again, plus or minus 15 minutes, the same time of each other. It worked very, very well, because there was no, I want to move around because somebody's getting a better deal than I'm getting. That didn't happen because nobody got a better deal than anybody else did. So that goes back to that common course calendar and syllabus and homework. Everybody was on the same page at the same time, and everybody got buy-in and input. I mean, there weren't 8 of us trying to create all of these materials for our own sections. There were 8 of us sitting in a room after 2 people had spent time previously kind of giving us a very fat version of each of these things that we could go in. I mean, faculty had the opportunity to say together, you know, I have a lot of trouble with this. Does anybody else? Maybe we need another day on that. So it wasn't like the course coordinators walked in August and just passed these things out and said, this is how it's going to be, we're done. There was conversation the entire time. I mean, there were adjustments all way through, and there probably still are, even those people have taught these courses for many years. There's probably still things, because we changed platforms, we changed textbooks, we changed all kinds of things. So I'm sure some of that changed along the way, but let me show you what we did. And please, Jonathan, keep me honest here. And if there are other questions that come up, or Connie also, let me know. But this is what our redesign looked like. Obviously with some edits, but this is where we're at right now. The co-requisite model piece, we had gateway developmental taken simultaneously. I told you the enrollments were independent of each other and the grades were independent of each other. I also said that the developmental teachers also taught the gateway. So if you taught that support course, you also taught a gateway course, because I wanted you to see that alignment there and how important that was. Students enrolled separately, they got 2 separate grades. This is a point of contention still today we are in a college of STEM. The dean at the time was a chemist, and his belief was that students paid for 1 credit hour, faculty got credit for 1 credit hour, and everybody spent 2 hours in that lab situation. So only in the math department does that happen here. We're still in negotiation about workload for other departments. They're a little concerned that I'm the dean now, so they think I'm going to give them that 1 to 2 deal that the math department got, which probably isn't a very good deal. Let's just say that. But we're still negotiating that outside the department. But there was some conversation about since our co-requisite course, our support course, was not the lecture course it had been. It was just mini lectures, kind of little snippets of material that somebody wasn't prepping it. There were other people helping. So we gave the course coordinators some professional development money. And then that was at this time, only saying what the dean said. And his rationale was we gave them some extra support monetarily to do the work in the summer. And the faculty, he pushed back a little bit and said, well, it's a 1 credit 2 hour lab. That's just how you're going to do it since you're not creating all your own material all the time. And it hasn't changed. So I said just in time instruction, there were many lectures. So in that 50-minute time for that co-requisite course, we'll talk about this. There were little things that happened, and then it was literally kind of a walk around and check and make sure if someone has a question, that's where we're going to deal with. So it was a lot of one-on-one that we hadn't had in those developmental courses before. So if you taught beginning algebra before, you stood at the board, as I did, and you lectured for 50 minutes. Maybe you got students up to work a little bit, but it wasn't the one-on-one interaction that we had once we changed this. So, and the co-requisite piece, the support piece, moved to a 25-person computer lab. That was my concession. I got 25 in the support course, and the president and the dean at the time got 60 in the regular course. So we'll talk about that just in a minute. But here's the support course again. I kind of went through this just a second ago. So if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. But what happened in that support course, that developmental piece, that course that had been the prerequisite material now turned into just in-time material. There were many lectures. There was time for homework. The idea with that was, and this was my 8 people sitting in a room having this conversation that first summer, and it continues today, was we wanted to give students little snippets of information. We wanted to make it relevant and just in time to what they were going to be seeing in that gateway course. And we wanted to have time with them to start working on that homework and hopefully get that homework finished while they were in there. So the assessment in that class has turned to a homework quiz, basically. I think we're probably all familiar with some version of that. But that was the assessment that they created in there. So one of the other things that we looked at here was a lot of these students didn't have study skills for whatever reason. So early on, we integrated study skills. So we first started talking about how to take notes, started talking about how to organize materials. As we got closer to that first exam, we started talking about how to study for exams and how to bring that material back to the forefront. So study skills were integrated very early into these support courses. They didn't obviously need much after that, so hopefully they had figured that out. And then there were some notebook checks that they did early on, just again to kind of reiterate that fact that you need to be organized, you need to have study skills. That's what's going to help you kind of further your progress in these particular support courses. So any other questions on that one? Is everybody okay? Okay, the Gateway Collegiate course was 60 students. So like I said, the bargaining was I got 25 in the support course, but the Gateway Collegiate course had 60 students in the room. It didn't turn out to be as bad as it sounds because actually the negotiation was 100 in the room to start with. So I feel like I won. I know maybe I didn't, but at least I feel better than having 100 in there. We did have graduate assistants in there and still do to this time. They are not teachers. They are literally just walking around checking things. So I still kind of have issues with how that's set up. They're not actually purposely doing anything other than walking around the room and checking on computers and making sure things are working the way they should, making sure they can get the instructor's station to come up on their screen, things like that. Many lectures here for the homework also, and then daily homework quizzes in this course also. So again, those little checkpoints, and those checkpoints are arranged by the individuals who are teaching this course. So if you're in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class at 8 o'clock and you had a quiz, your friend who's in the 9 o'clock class will probably have a quiz too. They won't necessarily be the same problems, but it's an idea. So I think by the time they got done, these groups had 5 or 6 different copies of exams where they'd move things around, change numbers for the final anyway. So they spent a lot of time working on the assessments in these courses. Now, it didn't start out that way, obviously, because that takes a lot of time, but it ended up that way. So I don't know that there's anything on here I haven't talked to you about.
So there is a question as to whether or not the course was modularly taught on a computer.
The course was not modularly taught on a computer. The course literally was taught like it would have been anyway. There was just more time for conversation, both in the support course and in the collegiate course. So the collegiate course looked similar to what the collegiate course had looked like before we did co-requisites. The support course looked completely different. So in terms of modules or modularly, it was taught chapter by chapter. We followed a textbook in each of those. Does that answer the question, Jonathan?
Wasn't my question? I think so. If it doesn't answer the question, feel free to put it back in the chat box. Oh, question: did you use adaptive learning in the Gateway course?
I'd like to say we did. I hate to say we didn't. I'd like to say we've moved into that. I'm going to say we probably aren't as far along with that as I would like to see it. Being honest.
And finally, in that computer lab, what is the work? What are they doing in the computer lab? What are the students doing in the computer lab?
In the Gateway course, because they're sitting in a 60-person computer lab, they are literally watching the presentation from the instructor. Because that room is so large, we push out that from the instructor. So it's either the instructor has a PowerPoint for a little bit, or the instructor's writing on a tablet, or the instructor's using a document camera. So the students are sitting there watching that presentation, again, because that computer lab is so large. So a majority of the time in the Gateway Collegiate course is literally the instruction is right in front of them on their screen. In the Developmental Co-Requisite course, they are sitting there in the room watching the presentation from the instructor for 15 of the 50 minutes in a regular 50-minute class. And then the rest of the time, they're working on the homework that was given for that particular course, not for the Gateway course, but for the co-requisite support course. And then they're getting help from the graduate assistant or the undergraduate assistant or the instructor. And then there's usually somewhere in there some kind of assessment, whether it's formal or informal. So the homework is on the computer in the support course.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The homework and the support course is on the computer.
Okay. So one other question: is the student during the lecture? So in the 60-person class, is the student able to ask questions during the lecture?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the faculty members there in the room, or are they remote?
No, the faculty members there in the room.
Okay.
The faculty member is typically walking around the room with the tablet, having a conversation with the students. We actually built that room with big whiteboards on both ends, a big projection system set up, and we've moved past that to the faculty members actually walking around, talking, writing on a tablet. So it is interactive in the sense the faculty members moving, and the students are able to ask questions of that faculty member who literally is in the room with them. Now, COVID obviously changed some of that conversation, so don't hold me to that completely, but idealistically, that's where we're going back to, let's just say.
Another question coming in: do the support course and the Gateway course have different homework assignments?
Yes, absolutely. The support course still has the type of developmental assignments you would expect. They're just in time, so they're usually a couple weeks ahead of the material that's necessary for the Gateway course. And then the Gateway course has that stereotypical finish these 25 questions that we used to have. So it is just like it used to be, except we've kind of modernized it a little bit. But there are 2 completely different homework sets, 2 completely different grades, 2 completely different types of assignments. There is no final in the support course. There is a final in the Gateway course still.
Great, thanks.
Anything else, Jonathan? Okay.
I think that brings us up to date.
Does that catch us up? Okay.
That catches us up.
Keep me honest. Keep me honest. Okay. I'm showing you this information. It does stop in the fall of 16. Like I said, I moved in and out of the department several times for lots of other administrative duties. So I'm going to show you this. I will tell you I've seen the data, but again, since it wasn't me sitting there, I didn't want to ask someone else to collect it and clean it. So the data has stopped, but it is about the same rate. So you see back in fall of 9, when I was department chair, our completion of developmental math in one semester, and below it are the numbers of students. So about 14% completed our developmental math in one semester. We had 3 courses, remember? So this is the people who placed at the highest level of developmental math before they got into whatever gateway course they needed. So as it changed, you'll see in fall of 14, that's our first implementation, 73% overall completed that in one semester. So right under that, the intermediate algebra course was still there. We didn't change the algebra sequence right up front. We did change those other courses. So we have the math for education majors, we have the survey, literacy course, and then we have the statistics course. Those are the 3 numbers on the left side you see under co-requisite labs. But the success in those labs up to 16 was almost 90%. Intermediate algebra still pretty dismal at 62%. And again, you still see about half of those students were in intermediate algebra and half of those were in the other pathway. So we hadn't made much progress at that point. So when I gave you the data for this last fall, where we've got about 60% moving into that pathway, things have changed.
So late breaking questions, actually, this may go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
There's a question about whether the amount of homework overwhelms the students. If they're in a, learning support students who are students with learning support and are in a gateway course, they've got double sets of homework. Does that seem overwhelming to them?
I never had a complaint about homework. The amount of homework in the co-requisite support course is minimal. It is to be finished in that course. So it's not like it's another 30 problems for them to complete. Gotcha. But the gateway course is gateway homework. I mean, it's typical homework you would expect, depending on which course it is, depends on, in statistics, you're using maybe Excel to create some things. In math education, you're using manipulatives or online materials. In the liberal arts pathway, you may be doing some other things. So you may be doing some financial math pieces. So that changed depending on which path you were in. And we all know how college algebra works, but it wasn't the same amount of homework, and it was a 1-credit course for them. So, I mean, they had, I would say, 1-credit homework in there, but it was finished in class every day. Obviously, there could be people who didn't finish it, I guess, but there was no reason. It should have been finished in class.
So can you talk a bit about the grade assessment in both gateway and co-rec classes? Did they both have grades that were separate?
They both had grades that were separate, and we gave A, B, C, D, F grades in both.
Okay. So
we did have that situation. And when you get down to it and you actually looked at the grades, we only had one situation where somebody made an A in the gateway course and an F in the support course.
So do you have...
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Do you have an attendance policy in the learning support course?
We did have an attendance policy in there. So after 3 absences, they received an email from me as department chair and said, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but you're not in class. If you get 2 more absences, I will administratively remove you from that class. So that's a university policy that had never been acted prior to me being chairperson and prior to the implementation of the co-requisite. So excellent question. We did have some shtick, as you call it, but we also had carrots in there too. Very rarely did I actually go through and remove more than 2 or 3% of the students. And what had happened was when I started looking, most of those students had either left the university or were sporadically attending other classes at the same time. So most of it wasn't a situation where somebody had gotten, accidentally gotten dropped or something, or had been sick, or we had people who had, just things happen. So, but we did. So good questions, guys. I love it.
And Dr. Desai, I'm not sure I know what this final question is. So you might just want to unmute and ask it if you're able to do that. I'll try and frame it, but I'm not entirely sure the frame of that question. Dr. Desai.
So Dr. Randolph, I'm asking about when I say grade assessment, I'm talking about what percentage of the homework, what percentage was the tests, if there was any formative assessment that was included in the grade assessment. If you could please elaborate on that, please.
Very good. Good question. In each of these 4 pathways, that was different because the purpose of the pathway was different. So in some of them, we all had exams, We all had finals in the Gateway course. We all had homework in the Gateway course. But again, as you asked Dr. Desai, the percentages changed from homework to assessment. So homework in some of the Gateway courses was 20%, with the assessments being 80%. Some of the homework was 25%, with it being 75%. I mean, it depended on the Gateway course, how much weight was put on the assessment compared to the homework. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and was there any formative assessment that you can think of, in the classes, and what were they, if there were?
The formative assessments?
Yes.
We had quizzes, we had exams, we had homework checks. We had, for those of you that are old high school teachers, we had ticket out the door kind of questions. So there were days that the team decided that it was getting kind of stressful. It was about 4 weeks. We weren't sure where the students were at. So they would ask them, up to this point, what's going well for you, what's not going well for you. And then they had a little sheet that they filled out before they left class, and they gave them like a 1-point test or a 1-point quiz for completing that. So it didn't really mean anything to the student, but the students were willing to fill it out because it was important for the student to have the instructor understand where the student was at. So we did some of that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about some new strategies or new formative assessment that all math instructor can do in our courses. Maybe something like a collaborative work, metacognition strategies, anything, maybe to send them to the board, anything of that nature.
In the Gateway course, in statistics, they had collaborative projects that they worked on. In the Gateway course, in the algebra path, they had homework sets that they worked on that had little projects in them. So it was kind of a sequencing of activities that they ended up doing. In the education courses, of course, there were hands-on materials that they worked in groups on. So again, I think, Dr. I understand your question. It's just hard to answer it holistically because each time, you're right, there were some things going on. We didn't send students to the board. But now, since we're teaching through Zoom, the students are allowed to write on the screen when the instructor teaches through Zoom because we have to accommodate the students who are not able to come to class. So those students actually get a voice by just writing on the screen. So there's some interaction going on there, and you can do some informal assessment there by seeing how the students are answering questions. So you can put up a question and have the students answer it on the screen and do some informal assessments that way. So we had groupings going on in the Gateway courses, but I wouldn't say that there was something across all 4 Gateway courses that we all did. I think it was independently designed for each of those pathways. But in the co-requisite piece and the support piece, absolutely, that was, I mean, I walked into those every day because it made me feel like I was a good old high school teacher again. I miss those days. I left high school because of the parents, and I got here and parents drove me crazy here. So, but the co-requisite piece really was a community. I mean, those students were up on the board, they were on computers, they were all piled up on one person's computer. I mean, it was a very different environment in there. And interesting enough, you bring up that question, the students that were in the support courses actually became more vocal in the Gateway courses. So some of the stuff they were doing in the support courses, they actually followed through in the Gateway course and would ask very good questions because they felt more confident about the material in the Gateway course. So those students started coming out of their shells. So when you did those group activities before, the students that really didn't feel like they belonged in that class or felt like they weren't as smart as the other students, those students wouldn't have participated at the board or didn't want to go to the board or wouldn't have participated in group work. Funny, I had a lot of those students who ended up being kind of the ringleader in that Gateway course. So their personalities just flip-flop when they got to the Gateway course. So those students were the students that, as you say, kind of led some of those informal assessments or some of those formative assessments we hadn't thought about before.
Thank you.
So that changed. Did that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
I'm not really answering your question, but I apologize.
Want to be a little mindful of time. We got about 10 minutes left to go before we have to shift back into general session. So
there's some data. So if anybody wants to see
some data.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. I'm sorry. I'm just so very used to hearing there's some data in my daily life.
There's data. So if anyone wants to see success rates, those are success rates. And again, they stopped in 17 because my position there stopped. Here, though, I will list some of the advantages of alignment. So we've talked about how things were aligned or not aligned or what happened or didn't happen. Probably the biggest thing was the last one in here. faculty were excited because they spent less time prepping for courses that a lot of them didn't want to teach. My tenure track faculty didn't want to teach a 100 level intro stat course. They didn't want to teach a course for liberal arts majors. So they got to spend less time working on their own and more time with other individuals, making sure it was a better course. So the change in attitude was huge. The other thing that happened was, and then I'm skipping around through here, so mindful of time, the validation for faculty. So the method you were using for grading, the type of problems you were giving, the timing of the content, the instructional method, just the things that you were doing to teach this course. Now they had teams of people to talk to about how best to reach the students in this course. Because a lot of students, these tenure track faculty never ever saw in calculus or discrete math or linear algebra. So although this was the bulk of the people that we worked with across campus, we really hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about or validating how we worked with those students. So a lot of this came from that. But obviously the consistency, the course drift was not there anymore. I didn't hear people saying, well, I want Professor X or I don't want Professor X or this professor's easier than that professor. It didn't happen because the professors weren't easier than each other. They were all giving the same assessments at the same time with the same course calendar, and the students saw that. I mean, that syllabus was common. Every student got the same syllabus with the same assignments in the same week at the same time. So it made it very easy for people to stay on track. And every once in a while on Friday afternoons when we didn't have department meetings, I'd see one of those groups in one of the classrooms grading together. They just decided they'd get together and have snacks and grade together. They didn't grade each other's papers, they just hung out and graded. And then when somebody had a question or somebody said, you know, question number 3 doesn't seem, somehow we need to read, and they'd go back and then change some things because whatever they thought question number 3 was supposed to be asking, the students didn't realize it and they weren't getting the answers that they thought they needed. So that was some advantages, I thought. Advantages from students. Students can move from section to section much more easily than they could before. Students could study together because if you were in Professor X's section and I was in Professor Y's section, we maybe didn't able to study together. Now we could study together. The tutoring sessions were much more productive, and I'll talk about that in the next screen, whether it was inside the department or outside the department. Since everybody in this course was always in the same place at the same time, the tutors didn't have to stress about they had to know 3 chapters at the same time because everybody was in the same place. Everybody received the content, same time, same place. And in the next course, if this was a prerequisite course they were taking, as in the case of the math education and obviously the algebra calculus path, the students should be equally prepared. The students should feel like they understand the material as well as the person next to him. It wasn't like, oh, well, my teacher didn't cover chapter 5. Well, mine covered 5, 6, and 7. So it was a very different feeling for everybody. Student support. We have a learning center in the department. We actually have 2 of them. We still have the traditional face-to-face tutors in there, but faculty actually moved their office hours to the tutoring lab. So students didn't show up in the office hours, so they moved to the tutoring lab, and faculty helped in tutoring during the learning center hours. They also moved to online tutoring. Obviously, COVID kind of increased the spread of that too, but we've moved to online tutoring. So the math learning centers in the department are actually projecting out this time, this room, this course. Learning Enrichment Center, which is university-wide, again, they had traditional face-to-face tutors, but they also moved to group tutoring. And group tutoring was so much easier because all of the people taking the basic statistics course were all in the same place at the same time, so they could do group tutoring now. And they also moved to online tutoring. Again, COVID kind of pushed us in that direction, but it was helpful for that. So tutoring even changed on campus. Support even changed and became more efficient and more streamlined. Okay, here's the pros of teaching those aligned co-requisite courses. So students were able to enroll in the college level and the co-req piece at the same time. Usually their first semester we tried to get them in. Obviously students were spending less time. Teachers got to know the students better. The students became more active in both of their classes. Teachers spent less time. I've said that over and over. And the courses became more cohesive because more faculty collaborated to get that course to be the best course it possibly could. So you weren't sitting there by yourself trying to figure out, oh, do I really want to do this? Is this part of, it's in the objectives, but I don't know if it's really in the objectives. You had other people to work with when you were doing that. The cons, and this is again in perspective, scheduling wasn't easy if you were trying to align these in cohorts. We didn't necessarily have that issue because we commingled them, but I know there are people who try to line everything up and it's not as easy. So that's a consideration. Also, the faculty need to change the idea of I have to sit in my office by myself and do this. they can work together. That's the purpose of this. So once a week we had faculty get together, and after the first realizing that, hey, this is kind of cool, I get help with all this, I only have to create one quiz or one test a semester, it became a much different attitude. So creating the course materials obviously was difficult the first time around. There was some tweaking, I'm not gonna lie, at least the first 2 years, and then we changed. So it started all over again, as you do with any new book, but you weren't sitting there by yourself doing this alone. And you rethought, as you guys asked me very good questions earlier about what happened in the classroom, you rethought how you stood in the classroom. You didn't stand at a whiteboard or a chalkboard and lecture all the time. You interacted with students. You walked around with a tablet in your hand. Excuse me. You worked with students in the developmental lab and the support lab and had one-to-one interactions with them. So what you did as a faculty member looked very, very different after we went to this model. Okay, one more piece, I promise, Jonathan. Make the commitment and getting to work. I talked earlier about backwards mapping. This just kind of talks about the levels of backwards mapping. So if you have meta majors, then you talk about those pathways, and then you talk about the appropriate college level course for that pathway. And then you talk about college level outcomes, and then we talk about calendaring and day to day or week to week. And then we talk about support that goes along with that. So you talk about that college level course, and then you backwards map all that support that needs to happen and when it needs to happen just in time for students to be successful in that course. And those meta majors align with those pathways that you have. Here are some things the Dana Center uses, very generic to start with. Like I said, out in the box or specific things that you guys will see that we ended up with, but anything that kind of gets you some idea about what to start with. So the day you're going to do something in the support course, and then 2 weeks before that, or plus or minus, what that needs to happen in that quantitative reasoning course. That's the QR. And any notes or materials that you need right there in that last column. So kind of giving you a big picture of how to set this up. So support content, we already have a line because we already know what that is. And then backwards map to the content of that support course and the instructional strategies and materials that you need to support that support course. If that made any sense. And then here's another way to look at that without the instructional strategies notes. If you're going to do this, some things to consider, obviously, making sure the algebra is in the right place at the right time, making sure that any other skills they need, reading, writing, problem solving, study skills, test taking skills, whatever that needs to be and where it needs to be. You don't want to give them test taking skills the first day because they're not going to need those for a week or 2 or 4, whatever it is. You want to give those note taking skills up front. You want to give those study skills right up front. So you spread those kinds of things out so the students have them when they need them. And again, making sure it's just in time. So rearranging the topics so it's not the same day as something that happens in the Gateway course, but it's a little bit ahead. Obviously, they're going to need a little more time to do standard deviation calculations than they are to do mean calculations if you're in the statistics course. Or in the education course, you're going to need a little more time to do probability, in my case, than you would to do the chapter on number. So making sure that you've got that where it needs to be. And I think I'm done, Jonathan, and I have 1 minute left. Here's the tiny URL. Connie is really quiet during this process. Jonathan, I appreciate it. If there's anything else, I'm happy to help. And if you want to find me or reach out to me, obviously I'm pretty easy to find. Jonathan has my contact. I think it was on that first slide, but please, please reach out if you want more information or help or more examples. I am happy to support your work because it's not easy work, and I'm impressed you guys have done the work that you have so far. It is rewarding. Students and faculty benefit from it. So that's my 3 cents at the end, and I've got a few seconds left.
Thank you very much, Tammy. I really appreciate it. And I am gonna note for those of you who are still here, please hold. The idea of common calendaring is something that's come up before, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we are gonna look around and see if we can find a volunteer or two campus wide to raise their hand and attempt it for the fall, because we really think the idea has merits, but we really, as you saw Dr. Denley's presentation, we don't do anything without data. So, and understand that in some point in the near future, we're going to be reaching out to your provost and probably your math and English chairs to talk about this. So this doesn't come as a big surprise. And this is an opportunity for you to sort of duck and have good excuses